Hi, I'm Sue Hillyard, and this presentation is being recorded for EA Zoom meetings. Welcome to my talk on eclipses, asteroids, and Aries-Mars retrograde. I will expand my thoughts expressed during the EA Zoom meetings Mars retrograde panel on September 10th, the day after Mars turned retrograde, as well as revisiting some of the asteroids I had mentioned in a previous talk called Eclipses, Planets, and Asteroids Tell a Story. I started that one with the eclipse season as a basis and filled in with pertinent celestial events that flesh out the story of 2020. And adding in some asteroids lends perspective and expands on some of the details. A whole lot has happened this year, and we're not through yet, with a bunch more planetary weather coming our way, including Mars and Aries for the rest of the year into early 2021. Having turned retrograde just before reaching the final degree, he is now backtracking through all of the aspects he recently made with Eris and all of the Capricorn planets. He will then station and move forward through a conjunction with Eris and squares with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. In addition to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, another major backdrop to 2020 is the square of Pluto and Eris. Mars retrograde will have activated all of these configurations 3 times over the span of this year, even stretching into early 2021. I'll stop for questions about halfway through, but if you have any along the way and you can get a word in edgewise, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. This past new moon at 25 degrees Virgo was at the bendings, or square the nodes, which were exactly conjunct the midheaven and IC in the chart cast for Washington, D.C. Also called the moon wobble, this is the time period exactly halfway between eclipse seasons. Remarkable events can occur during this time, as well as around eclipses, and Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death on September 18th can probably be included in this category. It has set up a gigantic backlash over the push of the current administration to nominate and confirm a conservative replacement for her before the presidential election in November. This has occurred in the foreground of an already unprecedented year, punctuated by at least 3 planetary alignments that all happen very seldom. Saturn and Pluto last met at 27 degrees 36 minutes of Libra in 1982. A Jupiter-Saturn conjunction occurred at about 23 degrees of Taurus in May of 2000. And Pluto and Eris meet up approximately every 350 years. Their orbits are both elliptical, so they spend varying amounts of time in each sign. They last met up in Sagittarius about 250 years ago. Pluto moves faster than Eris, so he is doing the catching up, and they are now forming a last quarter square known as the crisis in consciousness. Symbolic of what has been transpiring so far in 2020, slow-moving asteroid chaos recently met up with the North Node. Asteroids Pallas, Chariklo, Coronis, and George also figure into this year's current events. Mars turned retrograde on September 9th, and while he has been forming 3 squares each with Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in Capricorn, he is also conjunct Eris 3 times this year between August and December, while Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are also completing 3 squares each to Eris. Eris is the 2nd largest dwarf planet, named after the goddess of strife and discord. Astrologers are beginning to study Eris to observe and correlate what new energies we now have available in the cosmos since her discovery. Some have even suggested that she is the modern ruler of Libra and comparable to Pluto in her capacity for transformation. There are many sources of information about Eris on the internet, which you can always Google, but here's one that struck me as particularly interesting in the light of her possibly ruling Libra. From historicalastrology.com, if the Eris archetype is developed fully, humanity may never have to experience war again. The feminine of Eris will balance the aggression of Mars. A well-developed Eris archetype could banish all war. The ancient prophecy of swords into plowshares could be realized. The meaning of this is to allocate one's resources into peaceful pursuits rather than warlike ones. The discovery of Eris brings a completely new power to humanity. It is tricky and dangerous, requiring careful handling. Eris is a regenerative planet. Eris is exalted in the sign Cancer. Aryan women, no matter how warlike and violent they are, will always have a soft spot and a certain affinity with childbirth, pregnancy, and nurturing young and defenseless children. Yet Aryan women are the authentic warrior types, something not seen very often in the real world. You will, nevertheless, in allegory and in reality, see at times the Aryan in her armor and weapons, picking her way through the desolate landscape of war, possibly searching for renewal, for regeneration. Eris has an elliptical orbit like its neighbor and fellow dwarf planet Pluto, so it will spend varying amounts of time in each zodiacal sign. She takes more than 500 years to orbit the sun, and everyone alive now has her in either Pisces or Aries. She moved into Aries in 1923 and was discovered in January of 2005, so we are just starting to learn about this feminine warrior archetype. Nancy Pelosi, for example, born in 1940, has Eris just about 1 degree behind her Aries sun in a trine to her Pluto and Leo. The first two squares between Pluto and Eris occurred in January and June of this year, leading up to Mars entering Aries in June and activating the square between these two. Here's the time frame for the interaction between these three bodies, including the squares between Mars and Pluto and the conjunctions of Mars and Eris, as Mars catalyzes the square between Pluto and Eris. My creative numbering job was necessary to distinguish the many aspects occurring multiple times. This Mars retrograde occurs totally in Aries, which has not been the case for a long time. The last time it was partially retrograde in Aries was in 1988, when it dipped back into Pisces before turning direct. And in 1973, it started its retrograde cycle in early Taurus and ended it in late Aries. But going back to 1941, the Mars retrograde that time was completely in Aries. In September of that year, Bernie Sanders was born with Mars at 23 degrees Aries, 42 minutes retrograde. So he will be experiencing a return of his Mars retrograde for the first time in his life, with it being activated by the square of Pluto and Eris too. Also being set off by the Mars retrograde is his Venus in Libra. Both his Venus and Mars are in the signs of their traditional rulership across his first and seventh houses, which are naturally ruled by these planets. However, both signs are in the opposite of their natural position in the wheel, with Venus in Venus-ruled Libra in the first and Mars in Mars-ruled Aries in the seventh, creating somewhat of a paradox in the chart. For him, with this Mars retrograde, he could be more internally focused or present with a Uranian or different flavor than a typical Mars in Aries. His Sedna will also be involved, as the Sun-Mars opposition will be at 21 degrees, and his moon will have a total of 3 passes, 2 of which will be as Mars slows to turn direct and shortly after he does, as he slowly begins to pick up speed. Bernie will be an interesting study during the Mars retrograde as we watch him synthesize all of these archetypes and see how they combine and play out in real life. Watch him particularly over the next week, as Mars retrograde is exactly conjunct his Mars retrograde on October 5th. He's virtually on fire, embodying these archetypes. The Mars retrograde dates in 1941 were almost the same as this year. The degrees were similar, but a few degrees earlier. And that time, Mars made 3 conjunctions to dwarf planet Sedna during his retrograde cycle. Many with Sedna and Aries will have it activated during this Mars retrograde, and some also have transiting Eris there as well. In an article on astro.com, Alan Clay says that Sedna's astrological themes include transcendence and spiritual growth. From Clay's article, he states, legendary humanistic astrologer Dane Rudger posited that there were 3 different levels on which each planet could operate, depending on the evolution of our consciousness. The vast majority of us are at the beginner's level, and we will manifest the energy of Sedna from a position of being buried in the dysfunctional swamp of density. Largely unconscious of all the all-encompassing spiritual energy of the planet, we are likely only to notice it when it jolts our reality to correct some imbalance in our lives by bringing us illness or victimization, like the judder strip or sleeping policeman on the road to steer us back onto the true path of our soul's destiny. At the intermediate level, we tire of density and the grief it creates, and we start a spiritual journey to get out of the swamp. This is the key to working with Sedna. She wants us to get on a spiritual path or recognize the spiritual path that we're on. Then she hits us with transcendent crises, experiences which force us to let go and rise above them, resulting in a huge growth to a new level of consciousness. There is no choice with these crises, and the more we try and solve them, the more we will get hurt. At this juncture in human evolution, few people use their planets at the spiritual level, but such people are wonderful to be around. The well-known pattern with the other planets is that the spiritual level is vastly different from the 2 previous levels, and this is also true for Sedna. Here, the struggle of the beginner's level is gone, as are the transcendental crises of the intermediate level. At this level, everything Saturnian is meaningless, and yet everything Sednian has its place. He also says that at the unconscious level, it's fairly dark, but this doesn't mean that all darkness comes from Sedna. She just uses every tool she has to get us onto the spiritual path. And also in this article, he gives some keywords for these 3 levels of spiritual development. At the unconscious level, they include victimization, persistent illness, alienation, trauma and suffering, nurturing resentment, unbearable pressure, feeling caught in quicksand, and a personal blind spot. For those on the spiritual path, there are these keywords: radical acceptance, acknowledging just how bad things really are and starting from there, keeping our heart open in hell, nurturing our sense of humor, beating our drum and singing to life, fated transcendence. And at the spiritually evolved level, keywords include spiritual destiny, transcendent peace, nurturing abundance, allowing love and harmony, transpersonal consciousness. He calls her the higher octave of Ceres. Interestingly, after Uranus moves into Gemini, it will catch up to Sedna, who finishes up in Taurus and enters Gemini in a couple of years, just in time for the US Pluto return. She had moved into Taurus in the mid-60s. Jesse Jackson was born right before the middle of the 1941 Mars retrograde cycle, with Sun and Mars applying to an opposition. Sun and Mars, very close to the opposition. The 2020 retrograde cycle will activate his third house Mars and Sedna 3 times each, and in November, Mars will turn direct opposite his Sun. And in December, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction will be conjunct his ascendant. What will we hear from him? Paul Simon was born right after the Sun-Mars opposition. And this Mars retrograde will turn direct right on his Mars. So it will spend an extended period of time, actually about a month, within a degree of his Mars, meanwhile activating Sedna 3 times during the retrograde. And Simon's former songwriting partner, Art Garfunkel, was born a few weeks later, 4 days before Mars stationed direct. His Mercury in late Libra will see 3 passes of Mars in opposition, as will his Libra Juno. And his Aries Sedna will have the conjunction 3 times. He's not often in the news, but will we hear from him? Does anybody have any questions or comments so far? Take that as a no. So now, adding in eclipses and a few asteroids, here's a timeline of just some of the combined astrology and current events of 2020 that have surrounded the lead up to the Aries Mars retrograde, itself a rare happening in a very unprecedented year. I'm actually including the solar eclipse of December 2019, as eclipses are sometimes triggers for upcoming events. We then started the year off with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, ending and beginning a new cycle of these slow-moving planets, following their previous conjunction in November of 1982. We've had the coronavirus pandemic that is purported to have begun at the end of 2019, and the racial unrest as a result of several killings of Black people, including George Floyd, at the hands of police. Of note is that the asteroid George was conjunct the South Node in Capricorn within a degree of the solar eclipse at 4 degrees Capricorn, a couple of months before Floyd was killed, when we were halfway between powerful solar eclipses. George was also within 13 minutes of an opposition to the recent solar eclipse on the solstice. Asteroid George conjoined the South Node for a second time 2 days later as both approached the galactic center. Days later, Mars entered Aries. We have the second of 3 Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions, a lunar eclipse, an asteroid Coronis in Aries squared Pluto retrograde and conjoined Eris. A couple of weeks after that, Mars entered the shadow of its upcoming retrograde path and squared both Jupiter and Pluto. In mid-August, asteroid Chaos, which moves very slowly, met up with the transiting North Node, and we had the first of 3 conjunctions between Mars and Eris. A week later was the first of 3 squares between Mars and Saturn. 2 weeks ago, asteroid George caught up to the South Node again on the other side of the galactic center. And on the 9th of this month, Mars station turned retrograde and will now retrace his steps back through the squares with Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, as well as a conjunction with Eris. Mercury has also briefly entered the mix as it moves through the latter degrees of Libra toward the end of September, squaring the Capricorn trio and opposing Eris before it starts slowing for its own retrograde cycle. It entered the retrograde shadow yesterday. Asteroid Coronis had moved into the first degree of Taurus and then turned retrograde at the end of August, so it will also be retracing its steps in Aries, getting back to 17 degrees and 42 minutes before going direct on December 3rd, and then moving back through its own aspects with all of them. Coronis is one asteroid that had been associated with the coronavirus pandemic. The day before Mars goes direct, we'll have the third Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, also exactly conjoined with asteroid George. Mercury will have also stationed retrograde in mid-October in Scorpio and stations direct in late Libra on November 3rd, as Mars is slowing down to turn direct on November 13th. Mercury will square Saturn 2 days before and 3 days after its station. November 3rd is election day here in the US, so it sounds like we could be at a standstill, awaiting contested results as we were in 2000, when Mercury also stationed direct on election day. Asteroid George will catch up to conjoin Pluto, followed by a lunar eclipse, a solar eclipse, and finally, on the December 21st solstice, will be the much anticipated Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius in 29 minutes, with Pallas nearby. Pallas has been actively participating in the Capricorn party since early in 2020, weaving in between Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, now helping to usher them on into Aquarius. This is followed immediately by the final Mars-Eris conjunction on the same day as the conjunction of asteroids Isis and Osiris, which meet up every couple of years. These two asteroids, interestingly, don't travel far from one another, but take turns with one going out ahead and the other one catching up. Since 2007, they've also alternated meeting up first in Leo, then in Aquarius, as they do this time, with Isis doing the catching up. Isis is known as the synthesizer of love and wisdom from our experiences, and Osiris for fertility, regeneration, individuation, destruction, death, and rebirth. And if you're seeking further information as to the significance of their meeting, Gray Crawford has written an article about them on his website, graycrawford.net. In it, he says, the story of Isis and Osiris holds the intensity of their love that can weave together the most disparate of parts and heal the dismembered and fractured parts of our being. After Mars squares Pluto and exits the retrograde shadow, he will enter Taurus, where he'll square Saturn for the final time this go-round at 3 degrees, and then have the third and final meeting with Jupiter, by then in Aquarius at 8 degrees. Asteroid Coronis will also make its final contacts with Eris and Pluto, and then move into Taurus as well. Chaos is conjunct the vertex of this chart for the US election day, cast for Washington, D.C. at 7 a.m. when the polls open on the east coast of the country. Mercury is stationary and turns direct during the day, so it will not be moving much for a few days. This could indicate that we will not have a clear winner immediately, or that the results will be called into question. However, abundantia, signifying abundance, is in the first degree of Aquarius, in anticipation of the coming great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. So hopefully justice will prevail. That said, the day previous to this, on November 2nd, the asteroid Arizona will be conjunct Pluto at 22 degrees Capricorn, 42 minutes, very close to the January conjunction point. And the day after the election, Arizona will be exactly conjunct that Saturn-Pluto conjunction to the minute, suggesting to me that this state could somehow figure in the US presidential election. Arizona has historically been a Republican voting or red state. However, recently, Democrats have started winning key Arizona races in Congress. Democratic voting states are termed blue ones, and because more Arizonans are voting Democratic, the state is now said to be a purple one due to the shift toward blue. It will be interesting to see if there is any correlation with this asteroid to the election, especially with regard to their statehood chart, having this transiting asteroid conjunct transiting Pluto in a square to the lunar nodes. Arizona has had its share of difficult times lately, particularly with COVID, and the chart of the time of its statehood, taken as a birth chart for the state, shows the impact of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, square the nodes, and opposite a tight Ceres-Neptune conjunction. And I've observed charts that have between 20 and 26 degrees of cardinal signs, particularly prominent, reflect involvement in the pandemic. This would be an area of 3 degrees either side of the conjunction, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. This is also the same astrological vicinity where Pluto and Eris have all 3 of their meetings this year. On December 10th, the final Pluto-Eris square will take place with quite a cast of asteroids, now including Hecate to guide us through the dark. Horus, George, and Arizona have moved into Aquarius with Pallas to await Jupiter's and Saturn's meeting in January. I previously discussed these asteroids as well as the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn on the next solstice in my EA Zoom meeting, Eclipses, Planets, and Asteroids Tell a Story. Okay, here is the Jupiter-Saturn. Let's see. Sorry, bear with me a minute here. Jupiter-Saturn conjunction with Sorry. Oh, I know what I did. Okay, there we go. Here's Arizona's chart with the solstice great conjunction in Aquarius that occurs within 11 minutes of arc of their Uranus. Here's their Uranus right here at 0 degrees Aquarius, 50 minutes. And Jupiter-Saturn conjunction occurs at 0 degrees, 29 minutes. Pluto will still be up here. square to their nodes, with now Mars joining Eris in conjunction with their north node. Transiting Pallas is now leading the way through Aquarius. Adding more asteroids to the chart, you can see the great conjunction is within orb of a conjunction with Pallas, and asteroids Isis and Osiris, all in early Aquarius. Here. Asteroids Phaeton and Lilith are also within a degree of a conjunction to Pluto. The following day, on the 22nd, Mars is conjunct Eris retrograde at 23 degrees Aries for the third and final go, this time anyhow, and asteroids Isis will be conjunct asteroid Osiris at 4 degrees Aquarius in 53 minutes. Jupiter and Saturn meet up every 20 years, and for the last 200 years, the meeting has been in earth signs, and for the next 200 years, they will be in the air element. Toward the end of the 200-year cycle, there is one conjunction as a sort of preview in the element that follows. Then 20 years later is the final conjunction of the element of the preceding 200 years. In 1980, we had our preview of the coming air element conjunctions, with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction occurring at 9 degrees 30 minutes of Libra. The one in 2000 was around 23 degrees Taurus, and now this one is in the first degree of Aquarius. In 2040, it will be in Libra again, then Gemini, Aquarius, and back to Libra in the year 2100. On December 21st, 2020, at least 3 cycles complete within 2 days and begin anew, accompanied by asteroid Angel conjunct the south node. Is this when the healing finally begins? And you see Angel right there. Here are some meanings for the asteroids that I've mentioned. Pan and Pandora. Pan is all, every, whole, all-inclusive. Hygeia, health, prevention, not cure. Atlantis signifies hubris. Hybris also speaks of hubris. Chaos is the vast void or chasm, the abyss or emptiness before things came into being. Lucifer, the light bringer or shining one, discovering light through its absence. Asclepia, symbol of resurrection, revival, and a miraculous comeback. Panacea, remedies, cures, and solutions with an ethical or moral component. Abundantia, divine personification of abundance and prosperity. Isis, synthesizer of love and wisdom from our experiences. Osiris, fertility, regeneration, individuation, destruction, death, and rebirth. Horus, the sky god, also known as war god, hunter's god, god of kingship. Hecate, goddess of crossroads, magic, the night, moon, and necromancy. Mnemosyne, goddess of inspiration and memory, mother of the 9 muses. Lilith, rebellion, feminist, exile, freedom fighter, confrontational, equality. George is a named asteroid, number 3854. Could represent George Washington, George Bush, Demetra George, George Floyd, for a few examples. Coronis, named asteroid number 158, associated phonetically with the coronavirus. Taureau, strength, toughness, endurance, bullying, intimidation, brutal acts and words. And Phaeton, assuming responsibilities before one is ready to handle them. And it also has to do with cars, automobiles. And this important chart is from almost exactly 6 months ago. Cast for Washington, D.C., I've used this chart a couple of times. And because there's so much good information, I'm thinking it's worth another look. On March 24th, we had a new moon just days after the Aries ingress. Halfway between eclipse seasons, at the bendings, it was conjunct Chiron and Black Moon Lilith, which were square the moon's nodes in Cancer and Capricorn, indicating that a health crisis was occurring. This chart is a snapshot in time that I had originally presented in our EA Zoom panel on the pandemic as it escalated and we were trying to get a handle on what was happening. The previous new moon eclipse at 4 degrees Capricorn on 12/26/19 was conjunct the South Node and exactly square to this April new moon. The following new moon eclipse at 0 degrees Cancer 21 minutes on 6/20/20 was conjunct the North Node at 29 degrees Gemini and Sag, and also square to this chart. The astrological story gets way more complex when we add in some asteroids, including Pan, Pandora, and Panacea, which all have the same root as pandemic, along with a number of other asteroids, including Hygeia, Atlantis, Chaos, and Lucifer. Among other things, Atlantis signifies hubris, which speaks to the initial reaction of the administration here in the US to the pandemic. Pan is square Neptune, indicating the elusive nature of identifying the disease and confusion surrounding the response. These asteroids are all in Gemini, which rules the lungs, and they seemed initially to be the main target of the virus. Then opposite them in Sagittarius, we have Isis, Hecate, Mnemosyne, Hybris, which also speaks of hubris, Lilith, Osiris, and Horus. At that point, we hadn't started using the Coronis asteroid, but I've added it for you so you can see where it was at that point. In Pisces, right here, between Mercury and Neptune. Yet another indication of the confusion and elusiveness of information regarding the growing pandemic. Pallas sits at the future Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the 1st degree of Aquarius, combining intellect and intuition to foster wisdom, resulting in the recognition of patterns that will perhaps be revealed in the upcoming meeting. Saturn has already been past that point and turned retrograde May 11th at almost 2 degrees Aquarius. On May 17th, Pallas turned retrograde at 0 degrees Aquarius, 57 minutes, just half a degree after reaching that coming conjunction, and then began retracing her path, connecting again with all of the planets involved in the karmic cardinal suit. She moves direct tomorrow at 12 degrees Capricorn, interestingly, within a few degrees of asteroid Arizona, having hopefully generated the wisdom necessary to now move forward with healing, as she retraces her path over the Capricorn points and then ushers us on into Aquarius. I find it interesting that both sides of this Gemini-Sagittarius equation are enclosed by mythical figures that are related. In Gemini, we have Asclepia and Hygeia relating to health and healing. On the other side in Sag are Isis, Osiris, and Horus, flanking Mnemosyne, Lilith, and Hecate, reminding, guiding, and leading us through the dark. Asclepia is a symbol of resurrection, revival, and a miraculous comeback. From jessicaadams.com. Asclepia, as we've seen, was the miracle worker who could save you from the plague or pull you back from the point of no return. His daughter Hygeia, found in the year they made breakthroughs with cholera, is about prevention, not cure, and we get the word hygiene from her. Her sister Panacea is about remedies, cures, and solutions with an ethical or moral component. And as an aside, and perhaps a bit of foreshadowing of coming events, here, asteroid George is conjunct the south node in Capricorn, and asteroid Lilith right here. This ninth house journey for the U.S. began on January 12, 2020, when Saturn conjoined Pluto at 22 degrees Capricorn, 47 minutes, conjunct Ceres, who was out of bounds in south declination, as you see here, 25 degrees, 45 minutes of south declination. Perhaps foretelling the depths of grief in the wake of this monumental conjunction. Mercury was also nearby at 23 degrees Capricorn. Here. And was in turn conjunct Chariclet, who is Chiron's wife and holds space for our healing. In this chart set for Washington, D.C., Hygeia, who rules matters of health, is in the first house in Taurus, right here, very close to the ascendant. Pallas was visiting the galactic center, gathering wisdom from the 8th house for the coming journey. Almost immediately following that conjunction, 2 weeks later, on January 26th, was the first Pluto-Eris square at 23 degrees Capricorn and Aries, with Ceres still out of bounds in south declination, continuing to signal a dive into the depths of the impending epic health crisis that is beginning to unfold. Nine months later, we are still unraveling the meaning of what's happened, and Ceres is still out of bounds in south declination. Here's the chart for the middle Mars-Eris conjunction in about 10 days, again set for Washington, D.C. Now with Mars retrograde and approaching the middle of his retrograde cycle with his opposition to the Sun. Mars and Eris, opposite the Sun, coming to an opposition of the Sun. Mars and Eris are still within 2 degrees of a square to Pluto, who will station direct 5 hours after this, having recently revisited the exact degree of his conjunction with Saturn on August 29th, and will again for the final pass on November 8th. For those of us in the US, that will be days after the presidential election. So this conjunction is in the buildup to that, just about a month beforehand. Mercury will oppose Uranus days later, Mars will go on to square Pluto 2 days after that, and then Mercury will slow down and go retrograde the following week as well, to head back into the cardinal suit. There just may be more than one October surprise in the run-up to this election. Here are the recent Cancer Capricorn eclipses for reference. You can see that the two in July of 2018 and July of 2019 were a look forward, as they were both within a couple of degrees of Saturn's conjunction to Pluto, signaling the systemic breakdown and transformation happening in the world right now, and suggesting an underlying theme that seems to be playing out. That is, the corruption of the patriarchal structure. Much evidence of this is being brought to light for us to heal. The lunar eclipse on 24 degrees Capricorn was also a callback to August 23rd, 1939, when Mars, stationed direct, conjunct the south node of Saturn. I've noted that just over a week later, World War II started. This particular astrological area seems to be a sensitive one. And finally, here again is the eventual goal for this very unprecedented year. On the coming solstice, the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, within orb of a conjunction with Pallas, and asteroids Isis and Osiris, all in early Aquarius. Asteroids Phaeton and Lilith are also within a degree of a conjunction to Pluto, so there may be some transformation regarding elements such as, with Phaeton, assuming responsibilities before one is ready to handle them, or the Lilith attributes of rebellion, feminism, exile, freedom fighting, confrontation, and equality. Then to follow up, the next day, on the 22nd, we'll have the third of 3 Mars conjunctions with Eris retrograde at 23 degrees Aries, and asteroids Isis and Osiris will be conjunct at 4 degrees Aquarius, 53 minutes. Again, 3 cycles complete, at least 3 cycles complete within these 2 days, and will begin anew with asteroid Angel. Questions or comments?
Yes, Sue. Just trying to find Sedna. Oh, there it is, 27. 27 Taurus. It takes about 60 years to travel 30 degrees.
Yeah, it moves very slowly.
Yeah. What is your main idea? What are your main ideas about Sedna? What is it and what is required?
Well, it seems to have to do with knowing our spiritual path and being on, and actually being on that path.
Right. Right, because the 3 levels that Alan Clay wrote about.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Doesn't really, if someone is sick, it doesn't really mean they're on the lower level, does it?
No, and you know, my thoughts on the levels, and I'm air quoting here. Here, let me. Is that I think we travel in back and forth between them. Yes. I don't think we're necessarily on one particular level. I think we encompass all of the different levels.
Yes, I agree. That's exactly what I came to as well.
Yeah.
So, transiting Sedna is close to my descendant, and it's right on my south node. right now.
Oh, wow. So how do you see that
I'm
as far as
sure.
being on your spiritual path and being nudged?
Yeah, I think some of it's been pretty unconscious for me, and I think
Uh-huh.
through your meeting today, it's been fantastic. I'm just getting. I've tended to avoid it a little bit, thinking, oh, it's so slow. You know, what does it have for me? But actually, I think there's quite a lot to it.
I do too. As I was researching it, I just kind of boiled it down to and decided on picking his one quote because it seemed to encompass, where I was going with it and what seemed the main my main reason for pursuing it is because back because of those 1941, the last full retrograde in Aries in 1941
Yeah.
went back and forth over Sedna. And
Right.
so the people that were born in that period of time not only will be experiencing Mercury retrograde for the first time on their natal Mercury retrograde, but it will also be kicked up with their natal Sedna will be kicked up as well, and Eris is in there too.
Yes.
Going back and forth with the square to Pluto. So I mean, all three big heavy transformational, um, you know, um, minor planets, as they're called, ha ha ha, are all, being activated for these people. And I mean, I've just noticed, I saw today that Bernie Sanders is just, figuratively on fire.
Mm, mm. Anyway, I had a lot more to say, but I've sort of got a bit confused with my notes. So there was something I was going to say about Eris, and I think my Eris is, oh, I can't remember, I'm sorry.
In Aries somewhere.
Yeah, well, 25 degrees. What was the 25 degrees?
Well, that is where it is now, is between, about 22, 23, and 25.
Yeah.
She's right here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot's happening for me. I don't want to go on about my own personal stuff, but a lot of these they're not minor at all. They're really, really like quite heavy, aren't they? And they all work together.
They do, and and I remember that you have Mars in Aries as well, so you've got that going with the whole thing.
That's probably what I wanted to say.
But I forgot that I have Mars in Aries.
Oh my God, I'm so blown out. Like so much is happening. There's so much intensity. But
I know.
Yeah, exactly. And just
I mean,
yeah, go on.
Well, I see it for other people, but but you are, you're one of the ones that's actually receiving that energy.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's going pretty well. Like on a personal level, it's very hard, very difficult, but there seems to be an energy carrying me and it feels fine. It feels like, I've done it before or, it's not difficult. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's, the Eris, you know, feminine warrior energy, combined with the Mars, masculine war energy is, I think the two need to be synthesized. That was my main take from the Eris part.
Absolutely.
Was the two, and especially, going back again to Bernie Sanders' chart, he's got that Libra Aries thing going back and forth in the Mars Eris.
Right.
And I think you know, we may see him as the example of how to embody this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was brilliant what you said. The feminine heiress could hold the key, because I have this feminine heiress within me, and have never really known what to do with her. You know, she's been out in limbo, really. So
Yeah.
let's see what happens.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, they all move so slowly that, you know, I mean, now is you know, I keep saying unprecedented, unprecedented. I mean, there are so many things happening now that, you know, happen rarely, but it's like they're all happening at once.
Yes, very much. And that's what's needed.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And also, Sue, just quickly, I've noticed my Linda name asteroid there, and it's at 14 degrees Gemini, and this is for December 21, 2020. So that's just interesting that it's there. And
Yes.
I guess I'll just see if anything happens and correlate and observe.
Yeah.
Also, any predictions for the election?
Not
say.
a big fat mess.
Okay, so nothing very clear for you at the moment on that?
Not as far as who's going to win. No, I mean, you know, I go back. You know, I have my druthers, but you know, it's you know, I think it's all going to boil down to whether how prepared we are for the U.S. Pluto return, whether we're going to go kicking and screaming, or we're going to, you know, flow into it, or, you know, have we are we willing to transform, or do we have to be forced into it? You know, the old cataclysm.
I'm finding your meeting so incredible today, because I think what is needed is a lot more education. We have this North Node in Gemini now, and we're really needing more information to be put out there to help people, because it is confusing.
Yes.
And
yes.
The clarity. So thank you very much for all of the presenting all of these wonderful astro details. It's fantastic. They really do work on us.
Yeah, it's amazing how much they add to the story. They just, to me, they just flesh out the details.
Absolutely, it's essential. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Della if she had any questions.
I guess I was curious about the asteroid George, if it's always there at 6 Aquarius, or at what rate it's moving.
No, it is moving. It has been moving back and forth between Sagittarius and Capricorn, and it has just finished its retrograde cycle and went back. It was with the previous eclipse. Let's see if I can find it. Well, here we have, yeah. So here at the Moon Aries, he was at the very beginning of Capricorn, conjunct the South Node, and then moved forward, turned retrograde, and then moved back into Sagittarius, and then met up with the South Node in Sagittarius, and then turned and is moving direct again now, and moving back into Capricorn. So by the time we get to the solstice on December 21st, then he will have moved into Aquarius. And he seems to coincide with a lot of the unrest and the violence, you know, the uprising that's come out of the the killings of Black people by the police. And he also, there's another asteroid which is kind of interesting. The Jacob Blake was recently killed, and I looked at the asteroid Jacob, and there is a Jacobus, I think is the one, and that's that one. The meaning of that is to supplant. So it may be that, you know, each one of these seems to be upping the power of this George asteroid. It just, for some reason, to me, it seemed like he was kind of the biggest catalyst, his death, because it was so blatant and so horrific that it seemed to be the, you know, kind of signify the whole movement.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I will stop the share.
I guess, which software is that with all of the asteroids in it?
Oh, that is Sirius software.
Uh-huh. I've wanted Sirius for quite some time.
Oh, I love it. It is so complex. I actually take a class every month with the guy who developed it to learn more about it, because it has so many.
Yeah, I was kind of afraid I would get more than I could handle, really.
Yes. Well.
Or not really use it.
Yeah, but you know, I think eventually, you start, you know, you start seeing things that you can do with it.
Yeah.
You can also get Kepler. I forget. I think Kepler has I can't remember if Kepler has the asteroids or not.
I can't remember either, but I always wanted Sirius. I've looked at their catalog like several times.
Yeah, I know, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's missing a few things though that Solar Fire does, in that you can't animate, you know, the whole chart and move it all forward. You can do it with one chart, but I don't think you can. Well, you know, I don't have the latest version. This is version 2, I think, and I think you know, maybe they have that in version 3. He's always adding new stuff, so it's amazing.
Totally. Well, thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding your bit in. Thank you for being here.
Okay, and I just wanted to say that I thought that I was going to get too confused with it all, with all the information, but I think just the right things come out at you, don't they?
I think so, and you know, that's kind of why I decided to use these charts again, because I've used them in, you know, in like, this is the 3rd time for some of them. Mm. And like that one, the one chart for the 6 months ago, the Aries new moon, that has so much information on it, and to me that was kind of well, Aries, it was right after the Aries ingress. And it was kind of the starting, the kind of the ramping up of everything that's gone on this year. I mean, it was happening already, you know, kind of not really in the background, but that was when a lot of people started getting on board and realizing, yeah, there's something really going on here.
Okay, Sue. Well, thank you. Thank you very much from all of us.
Absolutely.
And look forward to catching you next time. I just wanted to say, you make astrology exciting.
Thank you. And I love your Linda asteroid by approaching the North Node in December. So
better get cracking. Better get to work.
Yeah. I think it'll just happen.
Thank you so much, Sue, and thank you, Della, too.
Yeah.
Bye.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.